everybody. I'm Liz Walker, and welcome to From the Heart. We've been away for a few weeks, but we are back. We are creating this online healing community so that all of us can deal with and cope with stress and toxic stress and trauma and grief. We want this to be your healing community. And tonight, later on in this stream, we want to hear directly from you. So I'm very glad to be back with you. Tonight, our subject is loneliness, America's silent epidemic. One of the many lessons I've learned since I've been working on trauma healing for the past 11 years is the connection between loneliness and psychological trauma. Now, it's not overt, and it may not be obvious, but it can run deep and it can be dangerous. In 2023, then Surgeon General Vivek Murthy declared loneliness an epidemic. And 2 years later, all signs point to this epidemic persistent or even increasing. The same situation with trauma. Collective trauma is out there. It is persisting. It is affecting communities all over the place. That's why we're here. That's why we have the Corey Johnson program for post-traumatic healing in Boston. That's why we have Can We Talk? So we're going to put these questions. What can we do about this loneliness trauma connection? What is the connection and what can we do about it? We're going to put those questions to my good friend, my colleague, co-founder of the Can We Talk sharing on trauma and healing, the licensed mental health clinician, Colleen Sharka. Colleen's going to join me because Micah's going to bring her magically. There she is. Hi, Colleen.
Hi, Liz.
It's good to see you. It's good to see you. Let's get right to these questions because the most important thing we're going to do tonight, we hope, is get people to talk with us directly from the community. How do you, first of all, how do you define? I'm glad to see you. I should do a lot of kudos, first of all. You are a wonderful woman, as busy as you are, to have time to come on our stream tonight. But how do you define loneliness? Because I think there are probably all kinds of different definitions.
Yeah. I mean, I personally, before you started bringing this up to me, always thought, well, it's being lonely, right? Because it seems like we don't really all have a working definition. But as I looked into it, I was stunned to see it was as I suspected, but I didn't think that what I was thinking was correct. And it's that people really need to make their own definition of it, in the sense, what I mean is that loneliness is something that you are perceiving. You know, it's a state of being. So what a same situation two people go through, one may never feel lonely and the other one does. So it's much more about the person perceiving that they're lonely. And they can do that even when they're in a crowded room, even they're with family and friends, they can still feel lonely.
It's a state of isolation that can happen in the midst of a crowd. Is that kind of...
They really perceive that they don't have enough people in their lives or the right people in their lives, and they feel alone.
How does that differ from solitude?
Yeah.
Solitude. Aloneness.
Right. Solitude usually connects with you. It's a positive thing. You've kind of gone away to be in solitude or retreated into your home and you don't go somewhere because you'd like some alone time in a healthy way and you want to maybe reflect on things or whatever. So it usually means something positive.
Yeah. So solitude obviously can be good for us. I'm
Yes.
what I call a solitary person. I'm a loner. I tend to spend more time by myself. That's just what I'm used to and what I like.
Yep.
But I too sometimes, and this is kind of an interesting thing to me, I too can be lonely. So it really is a state.
Yes.
That can be brought on. Connect loneliness and trauma for us.
Yeah. So there's three major impacts of trauma. The first one is that you don't feel safe. And when you don't feel safe from something that's happened to you that's traumatic, you start to not trust people. So then that leads to the next impact, which is disconnection. There's actually disconnection in trauma. It's not just in your body. It's also that you are feeling disconnected from everyone around you. And that is a normal reaction to trauma. But the problem becomes, as I'm realizing now, that if you're a state of disconnection, particularly affects you in deep ways, it can then become a state of loneliness. It
Mm,
goes on and on and on. And
mm.
then one thing I found that is brand new, I always love to learn new things, as you know, is that what can happen is if you're in a state of loneliness for too long, that's when it starts to impact your health, and not just your mental health that Vivek Murphy was talking about. And you develop things physically, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, etc. But what I didn't know is that if you stay in it too long, your brain kind of goes in a self-preservation mode, and it triggers the amygdala, that fight or flight response in our body, which ends up making us end up feeling more lonely,
Wow.
because we won't read the social cues in people. We will think people are more dangerous, and it's like a spiraling down.
Mm.
So that's why I think it's become like an epidemic.
We can talk to some people who have gone through trauma and they become so isolated. This is just what you just said,
Yeah.
that they don't want to be around people, but they want to be around people at the same time. It's kind of a paradox. You
Yes.
know what I mean?
Yes.
Because they feel
Yes.
the loss of connection,
Yep.
but then they don't want to cross over and make connection. What's
Right.
that?
I think that's the spiritual issue around it, because we are here, and I mean spiritual, not religious when I say this, that we are here to connect as humans. Our whole being is wired for connection, and we want to belong. So if we perceive, and I'm going to keep using that word perceive, that we are not connecting and we are not belonging, then that's what causes this eventually. I was looking at the CDC, says there's 3 types of loneliness. One is transient, meaning it's going to come and go, and that's normal. The second is that it's more, what was the exact word I had here? I want to make sure I find the exact word. It was more situational. That's what it was. It's something, somebody's died, something's happened, you've had to move. Obviously, there's a reason. But the third is chronic, where you don't leave that state, and that's where you start to develop that anxiety and especially depression.
Mm. I was reading Murphy's book that he wrote on loneliness when he was the Surgeon General. And surprisingly, because we tend to think of loneliness as an old people disease, right? When as you grow older, you lose
Yes.
your friends die, life has changed. But that surprisingly, a
Yeah.
lot of young people suffer from loneliness in an epidemic
Yeah.
way in the midst of social media, which is so bizarre to me because social media is supposed to connect us.
Yes. Yes.
Uh,
So it's funny. When I was thinking about that, I'm going to, of course, say that social media can have the tendency to divide us and make us feel more lonely than it does connect, because we read something, we're not there, they ignored us, or they did it without us, or whatever, increases it. But, I think it's more this. I've never met anyone in my life or in my work as a therapist or anything I've done where somebody doesn't have some core wound from somebody. Something either in their childhood, a parent, a betrayal, the way they were treated at a job, bullying. I don't care what it is. And I'm not talking trauma. I'm just talking a wound from relationships, right? And part of that, you talk to that person long enough and you'll hear that I don't feel worthy. I don't feel good enough. Somewhere you'll feel something not good enough. And I think personally that kicks off loneliness as a constant little trigger or a thorn in us,
mm.
always ready to go off. And I think that too is like a spiritual kind of sense of we're here to connect, but we're going to have a challenge doing it.
Do you think that's something that we all have? We all have those wounds. So
Yep.
those wounds always click into potential loneliness for
I think
us?
potential. And again, most of us, I do think, kind of come and go out of it, like you're describing, which we got to recognize is normal. But
Mm-hmm.
again, it's when we just never quite get at it. And here's one of the things I was wondering: how do you get someone to take a look at it? If people would say, "Yeah, I'm lonely all the time," I would ask them, "Well, what are you getting out of that?" And I don't mean that in a facetious way. I mean that it's probably some reason that they keep feeling that way all the time. So they're getting some message from being lonely. It might be that, oh, see, that proves I'm not good enough. It could be just about or what my parents said, that I wasn't ever going to know people or have friends. Maybe that makes it true. I've noticed that loneliness can turn into victimhood pretty
Oh,
quickly. And
Now,
people can feel like a victim all their life.
right. So, but wait a minute. So what does that make? So loneliness can turn to victimhood. So when you say
Feeling that way.
that, that's a judgment call. So does that mean that when I think of victimhood, I think of something negative that we, it's something we
Right.
shouldn't. What are you
Right.
saying?
And I mean it more as we kind of feel that nobody likes us, right? So we feel like there's something wrong with us. So we feel a bit of a victim when it gets to be too long. Not everyone. I'm just saying to watch for that,
I
and
see.
to ask yourself questions. Why do I think this is happening?
You're really good on that kind of self-reflection thing, which really I'm suggesting that as a way
Yeah,
to deal with some of our issues.
absolutely.
Do you think that we do that a lot? Because you gave me some wonderful advice today about speaking to God and kind of reflecting on some issues that I was going through and kind of asking myself.
Yep.
Do you think that that's a natural thing that we do anyway, or is that something we have to kind of learn? That's self.
I think that's been taught out of us over generations.
Really?
I do. I think structured religion, I love it, but on the one hand, it's there's so many ways in which I know in so many Christian religions, for instance, that you're a sinner first. You don't talk to God, you pray, but you whatever. There's a lot of messages people got that we know are not true. So I think it's taken out of the direct talk with God. It's as if you got to have a priest or a minister or a Bible or another holy book in the way. And I think those are wonderful, but there's also this. So my first thing is always, and it doesn't have to be God. It's however someone understands that loving power and loving energy that's beyond us,
Mm-hmm.
the creator, however we name it. We need to have some way of either connecting with what we believe like that. But even if we have a hard time with that, what you're saying is you can do some interior dialogue. You can learn to do it, and you can learn to watch your feelings and your thoughts. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you think about it this way, if you suddenly feel lonely and you allow that loneliness to just sit there and you energize it, you can then have a thought, well, of course I'm lonely because I'm not pretty enough, thin enough, whatever. You put it in there and it goes on. And before you know it, you're on that path. If you can interrupt that and watch your feelings and your thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
you could
Mm-hmm.
perhaps turn that feeling. And I'll use this. Pema Chodron, a Buddhist nun, says if you wait 90 seconds for a feeling and don't energize it, it'll go away.
It's so funny that you talk about that. I was trying to see if I could look up a scripture that it's our interpretation in Christian
Yes.
tradition to believe that we can't reflect or we can't talk directly
Right.
to God, and
Yep.
it's not true, because Psalm 42 is a psalm that tells you, I'm always going to try a sermon, and
I
where
love it. That's why I'm smiling.
helping y'all. But Psalm 42 says, why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your
Yes.
hope in God. In other words, preach to yourself
Yes.
when you're going down. And that's kind of what you're saying, right? About
Oh,
self-reflection.
you bet. And I'm going to go further. Befriend yourself. If we believe God loves us, we must be lovable, even if we don't believe it. So why
Right.
don't you, sometimes I say, act as if you believe it.
Right.
So give it a try. Befriend yourself. Be your best friend. Talk
Right.
to yourself, not criticizing, because we got enough of that voice in our head, but sort of saying, hey, maybe that thought isn't true. And when you get a thought that says, I'm not worthy, you can actually ask yourself, is that really true? Like there's a lot of lies we tell ourselves. Challenge yourself. Do some journaling. Kind of have a dialogue with yourself and see if there's something you can learn that can help you break through when you're into a cycle that's not helping you, especially
Right.
about being lonely.
Right. So this loneliness, this loneliness that we feel might be tended to when we can begin to kind of reflect on
Yes.
the reason that we're feeling this way. If this
Yes.
is situational, or is this a pattern, or is
Yep.
this something that that's been there all the time. So that's one step right there.
It is. Oh, I think that's one of the biggest things. And it's funny, you're starting to get at what a strategy for addressing this is. I'm going to say my thing. I reflected on this topic by myself, with myself. And the first thing I said, if you're going to say one thing, love is the answer. Because we are not loving ourselves by telling ourselves we're not worthy, or we're not this, or we're not that, which helps us to feel more lonely. And, you can go off in a whole bunch of things saying, oh, they're so wrong because they're doing this to me, or they're so wrong. We have a lot of wounds and we have a lot of right to feel that way. And,
Right.
we can keep doing it. But where does that get us? What about if you turn it around and say, well, regardless of how they're behaving, I'm going to choose my own response. I'm just going to start loving people more. I'm going to start being curious to them, even if I think they're not being good to me. I'm just going to respond with love everywhere I go.
So some of the things that you have to do to kind of tend to your loneliness or work with it or learn to cope is the inner stuff. That's the inner
Really is.
conversation that you're talking about. But certainly we know there's lots of outer things you can do, or some
Yes.
physical things you can do and social things you can do. But and I want to get there, and we also want to hear from everyone,
Yeah.
anyone. We hope you're out there and we want to hear from you. But I read something, Colleen, that said children who are traumatized, and I'm talking about psychological trauma,
Yep.
tend to go through more loneliness as an adult. And I think you kind of touched on this.
Yep.
When you're carrying those wounds,
Yes.
especially if they haven't been tended to, right?
Right. It's unattended trauma, untended trauma. And then if they've been a child, they probably likely got more wounds along the way. And that's when you get into what we call chronic and complex trauma, where there's a bunch of reasons and events that have happened to you, and they just keep piling on.
Right. So when trauma is severe to that extent,
Yes.
and sometimes we see people who come to us and Can We Talk who are suffering from severe trauma, who really do maybe need one-on-one counseling.
Definitely.
How difficult is it to get out of that kind of loneliness?
Yeah. Well, I think that's the perfect thing to make sure I get to say. All these other things I've said are great suggestions, but we also know that sometimes what has happened to people, not what's wrong with them, but what's happened to them over their lifetime has led them to have such chronic and complex trauma that we just said, and we've seen them at Can We Talk before, that they've shut down. They're having also a normal response to the level of what they've gone through, and they might have had so much loneliness throughout that, it's become even more triggering, right? And causing more trauma. So what we've witnessed, and I'd say we've learned this together, is by going and doing, not just the one-on-one is great for therapy, but an additional thing is to join some kind of group or attend some kind of group setting where you're actually with other people. And that's a step in the right direction to be around others that might become people that can connect with you. And we've seen that happen to people who have been so alone and find connection at Can We Talk over time, a community setting.
Deborah Fitzpatrick and I were in Nashville, Tennessee this week at a wonderful time on Vanderbilt University's campus with the St. Augustine's, which is the Episcopal church there. And one of the questions the woman asked, one of the people asked, because they were very interested in the work we're doing, was why does being in a group make the difference? Why does talking about our pain to lots of people, and you just kind of began that conversation, you began to answer that. Could you tell us some other reasons why you think that speaking about something very intimate, something very hurtful in a public kind of arena would actually help us?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, you've heard me say this a million times, but I believe it to my core. It's a spiritual answer. And it's what Brene Brown found in her sociological research, that it turns out, again, she interviewed so many people. This is the same thing she found out, that when you're vulnerable, and that's what we're feeling when we're lonely and we're traumatized, right? We are absolutely vulnerable. So when we were with other people who are vulnerable and we either share or listen to them, doesn't matter, either or both, we are meeting in vulnerability. And when we do that, she found that it's also the birthplace. When you do that, meet in vulnerability, it's also the birthplace of more love, belonging, and connection. So I will tell people until I die that the biggest surprise and shock and amazement at Can We Talk and where people are vulnerable and share is that vulnerability is a meeting place for connection. Because we are stripped down. In fact, we are united. The feeling of vulnerability we all share. So then for some reason that allows us to feel connection more.
Wow, wow. Well, I definitely want to talk more about the solution, but let's get back to the problem just a
Yes.
bit.
Yes.
I started off by saying we are in an epidemic of loneliness in America. That's what Vivek Murthy said. That's what many psychologists say. Do you, from what you see as a licensed clinical mental health provider, do you see that too? This kind of epidemic
Yes.
sense of loneliness?
Yes. And I found in a study that there's actually a graph that shows since the 1800s, there's a straight line up. People are reporting loneliness more.
So
Now, I'm
why?
not sure how they reported it much in the 1800s, but they measured something about loneliness that it has gone up so incredibly, especially in the last 50 years. And so I guess the biggest question is there's a lot of whys, but I think it's it's several things for me. It's the fact that people feel what they feel. I think somewhere deep inside there's something wrong with me or I'm not good enough. That's a bad seeded ground, right? For us to end up getting a loneliness problem. But I think more than that, we don't have the structures in our cultural and sociological settings that we used to, where, you either were living with more family or you joined friends and lived together or something. You didn't tend to travel so far away from everyone you knew. That certainly can make us feel lonely. You've got the social media, which is always social media. If you read it too much or look at it too much, has a message of you. Look at what everyone's doing. Are you doing those things? Well,
Mm-hmm.
nobody could do all those things, right? But it's the human brain of how it perceives that. We tend to look at the lowest denominator when we're kind of looking at all that. Do I measure up to that? Do I measure up to that? And then you start again. It just feeds this sense that I'm not good enough, and then you get COVID on top of that.
Right. COVID was a
I
huge
mean,
thing. I don't want to go wait, before you go to COVID. Let's stop at social media. I've gone to kids. Now, this is one of my pet peeves, and it will be in the same room, but don't talk to each other because they would rather text each other.
yes.
So this whole notion that you're using this machine, do you think there's a potential? And now we've got AI. So
Oh, yeah,
there's
absolutely.
so many things that seem to
Yep.
me that's going to make us lonelier.
Yeah, if we're wired to connect and we must do it to be as healthy as we'd like to be, then the more barriers we put in of going on a machine and not being in person, I think I think remote work is wonderful because we were working too much away from the house, but to go to no working in a workplace, takes away chances of meeting people to get married, takes away chances of making friends, takes away, I mean, think of all the people that met their family, future family, friends, etc. We'd be great if we balanced it a little more, I think.
Absolutely.
All
Absolutely.
of it, everything in balance. Social media is not all bad. We just need to balance it.
We need to balance it. And then you got into COVID. And I think it'll be generations before we really understand the impact, the bad impact of COVID.
Bad.
It's gonna take a long time. We think we know how COVID hurt us, but I'm not sure.
No.
So COVID certainly increased our loneliness, correct?
Yeah. Especially for children, that every teacher will tell you, I hear it all the time, the social and emotional development of the children in their grade, where they should be, they're not there. The development is behind. And then again, what does that feel like? And then if you feel like you're not as good as anybody else, or you feel people might not like you, it just churns up the disconnection, and people are not, getting more opportunities to connect. They're getting less.
So how are we going to start changing that for our kids, do you think?
Yeah, that's.
Do you have
You're
my guru.
No, not that I have all these answers. I think everybody on the call has them.
What do you
start with ourselves? If we've got to start with ourselves, get ourselves in a good balance, and if you're not connecting with enough people, put yourself out there physically somewhere in a group or join a club or whatever. Those are so important, and our children will watch us doing that. We need to encourage them. We can do it. We just have to pay attention.
One of the ironies for me is that my connection with Can We Talk now, we have a Can We Talk here in Sarasota, and I'm working on that, but I'm doing a lot of traveling with the book, and I'm doing a lot of moving around. So my connection is more social media, more online than it is in person. And I think, you and I had a long conversation today, and I'm not trying to work out my personal issues on this program, but I've been thinking about it. I think some of it is the disconnection for me, not being in person with someone that can kind of throw me. And I'm so excited when I see human beings, because I spend, so much time on it. But I want to continue to talk about the kind of things that you think will help us reconnect. I read an article not long ago that it says longevity, and they're doing studies on super agers, and those are people who are in their 90s and doing really well, who are in their 90s and not hospitalized, who are basically healthy at 90. And one of the things that you just touched on is their social life.
Yeah.
These are people who are absolutely active in clubs and in their neighborhood. So that social thing is huge.
Yes, it is.
So that social community. Yeah. So
and
what?
I was going to say, that's so perfect that you're bringing that up, because if we're only going to join something by going to somebody else's thing to join, a lot of people can't do that. You got to also bring up capacity here. Sometimes people don't have the capacity to do a lot of things we're saying. So one of the things I like to think about is, stay with the capacity you have. And if you can start a group you'd like to belong to, and I know that sounds weird, but if somebody just invites one person they know, or they want to take a chance on one and get a third, just even 3 people make 2 people, you don't call it a group, but 3, you start to call it a group. And I think, if that's on your heart and mind, it's got to take courage. I think, and I want to bring this in, the serenity prayer that is said at all these AA wonderful 12-step programs. I've been thinking about how that connects with this. And this is the way it goes for people that don't know it. God, and you can put the word divine in there, creator or love, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. That's the first part. So think about that. Things I cannot change. Courage to change the things I can. And the wisdom to know the difference.
Right.
It applies here. Because if we keep focusing, a lot of times when I am with people who are dealing with loneliness in a therapy session, they're always focused on what's being done to them that makes them feel lonely. And they have right to that feeling. But if you've got to reframe and help people to get to, okay, is there anything in there that you can't change that you're talking about? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, yeah, all of it I can't change. So maybe that's the issue, not so much the loneliness as accepting what you can't change. Then go to the next one. What's the courage? It's going to take courage to try to go join a group, or just don't even have to join. The thing about Can We Talk, and we want to make sure people on the call know this, you show up at a Can We Talk. You don't tell us you're coming. You don't sign up. You can actually come in that room, have some food, sit down, and never talk to a soul. And just get something out of listening and being with people as a first step. That's the courage, right? And the third thing is the wisdom to know the difference. So if you just remember, what can I change and what do I need to accept? That's a big difference.
And I want us to get back to that on the other side before we close out, because I think that's a good thing to remember, the serenity prayer. But right now, why don't we open it up to see who's out there? We know we've got some callers who are part of our Can We Talk community. So Micah, if you'll show us the slide that gives us our question so that people understand exactly what our question is tonight. We're asking that you share an experience when you felt disconnected from others. And then I'm going to put the second part of that is, and tell us if you worked it out or how you worked it out. And all you have to do to talk to us, and this is what Micah told me, is you can join our caller list by putting our caller link into your browser. That's tiny.cc/callrevliz. You can just go to tiny.cc/callrevliz. I'm going to say it one more time, tiny.cc/callrevliz. So we have some people on who have joined us from our community to share an experience when they felt disconnected, and then to tell us how they got out of that if they want to. So I'm not going to call any names. We're going to keep this anonymous. So you're going to hear voices and not see faces, but only because we want to respect and honor your story. So our first caller is there, I think,
Hey,
and
Reverend Liz, how you doing?
I'm not even going to call your name, but because I'm trying to learn how to keep you anonymous. But thank you so much for joining us. Can you share an experience when you
My
felt
pleasure.
disconnected? Tell us a little of your story.
Listening to both you and Colleen talk about it, it's hard not to get emotional when you kind of hear your own story being played out and how, I come from a really small place, a biracial child in a dysfunctional home full of a lot of domestic violence and dealt with a lot of poverty in the 1980s when it wasn't really cool to be in poverty. And so I grew up, one, not trusting people, and one, not wanting people to know the kind of place that I come from, and building these emotional walls. And my emotional walls look, it might be, my a stone face or anger or um what's the word I'm looking for? Sarcasm. So, and I can really relate because I enjoy my solitude. I don't really feel lonely until I'm in a room full of people. And it can be people that I know care about me. So, it's just been a real struggle for me to connect. I came out to Boston in 2014 because I'd been many years dealing with substance abuse and I needed a new start. And I came out here because I went to school out here uh, in my 20s in the early 1990s. And I knew there wasn't none of my drug of choice around here, but I really didn't know nobody outside of a few friends that I had hooked up with uh, over Facebook. And living in the shelter system, being homeless, a lot of isolation, a lot of disconnection. And I think maybe because I became, that's when I started seeking sobriety. And I also got involved with Can We Talk and was sharing my story and also hearing my story, to a lot of the other people. It made me feel comfortable sharing and just kind of putting myself out there and trying to hold back that part of me that wants to be a jerk to push people away. You know, that's how I deal with, that's how I isolate myself, is by pushing people away. And just being involved in Can We Talk has been, a godsend. You guys have been a family. I'm 3,000 miles away from home, and you guys have been a family to me. So I know I asked 3 minutes. So thank
You
you.
no, that's amazing. Thank you so much. On Can We Talk, we don't respond. I had a question, but I'm not going to ask you because I want to keep this as close to Can We Talk when we meet. But thank you. What courage it takes to be so vulnerable and sharing with us. And Micah, can I quickly just get Colleen back on, because I did want to respond to that caller's one statement. If you could put Colleen on, and I can see if I can ask her this question. And Colleen, did you pay attention when this caller said, I'm used to being alone, and I actually feel lonely
Yeah.
when I'm in a room?
Mm-hmm.
That touched me so deeply because I have that same thing sometimes.
Yep.
So how do we? But he said that Can We Talk helps. So what would you suggest if I'm going through that kind of thing?
Right. In fact, that was a perfect example of what the definition is of loneliness. It's your perception, right? So we can be in a crowded room and feel it. And we need first to honor that, right, in ourselves because we all do feel that. I don't think there's anyone that hasn't felt that sometimes. And, we have to honor that we feel it. And that's my first thing, is to say, do the best you can not to judge yourself and to only respond to yourself with self-compassion when you feel that way. Because like we all know it, Can We Talk? To feel like that, there's a reason. It's a
Yeah,
reason of things that have happened to you.
yeah,
So it
yeah.
needs to be honored. That's the first step. That's what I'll say.
Thank you. Thank you. Because that really opened something up for me. And what you just said, Colleen, is so important. It's like naming the pain,
It is.
understanding what's going on inside you. So let's go on to another experience. Again, the question we're at, if you could share an experience when you felt disconnected from others. I think we have another caller on now from our community. I'm not going to call your name, but I'm going to say welcome and just tell us your story.
So good evening, Reverend Liz and Colleen. When I felt the most disconnected was after a loss, and it was very dark. It was very scary. And I just felt like I wasn't handling grief very well. I wasn't handling the loss very well. And so I found myself constantly by myself. There were people that was coming around and trying to support me, but I didn't want to be around them. And I think the reason why, I just feel like I felt so ugly because I was in so much pain and I couldn't see myself for who I was. And so I felt like the pain was really taking control of my body and my mind. So for me, it was just the point of hiding out and not letting people see me in that despair and in that way. I went through a lot of feelings of just feeling like I was going crazy. And it was really hard to convince myself that I wasn't, but it was just the feeling that I was feeling when I was disconnected. And also I felt like, you can be disconnected from people, but you can also be disconnected from yourself. And so I felt like, once again, I could look at myself in the mirror, but I wasn't seeing myself. I was seeing just the pain and all the things that I had went through. So it's really lonely. It was really challenging. It was really hard. And today I can say I'm in better space because of reaching out and participating in programs. But sometimes it still shows up. Once again, like you can be around so many people and you still feel that lostness and loneliness and just wondering what other people are feeling or how they're looking at you. And, just it's a lot of things go through your mind. So for me, your mind's really in control of everything that you're going through. And it's a really hard fight and it's very dark. And I just pray that I can keep going on my journey and hoping that this podcast or this showing tonight will help other people see that even though it is really, really dark, there is light. There is light. And it just takes some time and it just takes some self-convincing and some self-work. Because at the end of the day, no matter who comes around, it's internally what you have to do for yourself to get better. So thank you so much for letting me share.
Oh, no, thank you for sharing, because this is really helpful to all of us. And the idea, especially that you said it still shows up. And again, I'm going to ask you, Michael, we didn't plan it this way, but if you don't mind, I want to go to our expert because the idea of fixing stuff is something I want to make sure that people know. One of the things that we don't do at Can We Talk, we don't promise to fix anything. And I think that sometimes, Colleen, in our culture, we believe in quick fixes. We think that things can just, okay, if you take this pill, you never be lonely again. Or if you read this book, what are some of your thoughts about fixing and not fixing?
Yeah. Fixing is the worst word ever applied to human beings, right? In terms of their recovery. Nothing can be fixed. It's all a journey, right? And it's all about, especially what was just said, we have to reconnect first with ourselves before we're even going to be able to connect with others. You got to do a little bit of both. And I think that this notion that, if we medicate people, medication can be very helpful to help people do the work. That's the way I like to look at it. Sometimes you need medication to help do the recovery or growth work you want to do. And you may need to stay on it for a while, if not the rest of your life, to help you. But the notion of medicating our problems is never good. It might dull them, but it's never going to actually help it. And the last thing I'll say is that our tendency to do that is the whole notion of trying to jump from what happened that was awful to get to a new day without going through the in-between time.
Right.
And that in between time is the vulnerable time. And so if you learn nothing else from tonight, I hope we can all name, to at least be interested in learning more about how vulnerability is not ever bad. In this sense, vulnerability is the place to be, to actually name, let go of, cry, release what's happened to you, loneliness especially, before you can ever get to the new place that you're looking for, your new story.
Right. And that, to me, in a spiritual way, without preaching a sermon, is that mystery of how joy and pain are connected. You got to go through the pain.
Yes.
You know, our young people are always talking about joy. We black girl joy and we want that. And that's exactly where we're trying to get. But to think that we can get there automatically, or to think that you can get there despite the pain, it may take a little bit more work. I mean, maybe you can. Maybe joy and pain are connected so closely that you could carry them both. But I don't think you can deny the pain. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
That's really it. That's really it.
Yeah. This has been really helpful. I feel like I'm learning some things tonight. So
I'm learning from everything we've been saying already.
It's really helpful. So the question is, and we would love if you're out there and you want to call in, or you just go down, this is language I have to learn, tiny.cc/call Rev Liz. You can put that in your browser and you can be on too. That's what we want this community to be. And we're going to work on that until you feel really comfortable. And we hope we'll have so many people who want to share their experiences. But tonight, the question is, share an experience when you felt disconnected from others. We have another caller on the line, and go right ahead. Tell us your story. Are you there? Our caller's on the line, and hopefully if you're not on the line, you'll be coming on in a few seconds.
Okay.
Share an experience when you felt most disconnected from others.
Well, I had a horrible, horrible tragedy happen in my life. And I think that definitely disconnected me from others. I was in a place where I didn't belong. I would never fit in. I think that when I was younger, I used to get panic attacks. And when I figured out what was causing them, and I said it out loud, they stopped. So I think that's how I deal with loneliness and being disconnected, because that is a feeling it's sad, it's heavy. I feel anxious. And then I think I try to figure it out, because I think loneliness in itself is such a disconnecting thing. I mean, I sit in it for a while. I might take a good cry. I may eventually call someone, maybe my sister, but I would never say, I'm calling you because I feel lonely. Because it's uncomfortable to say that. So I think that the way that I deal with my loneliness is I think I isolate myself. And I think that's where the disconnect comes in, because I really could isolate. And it starts to feel real comfortable. And, this is when I know I have to kind of break that. So I would, like I said, I would call someone, mostly my sister. And eventually, I mean, as we start talking, maybe not even it wouldn't be about my loneliness, because I would never say I'm calling you because I feel lonely. So I sometimes wonder about that. Like, is that something to be ashamed of because I feel lonely? Is that like totally taking you out of your comfort zone? You feel so vulnerable when you have to say I'm lonely. So I think that when I start really talking to people, even in the program, I think that's when I start figuring out that loneliness and isolation sometimes it's the same thing for me sometimes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. You brought up a really interesting point about the shame and not wanting to say that we are lonely. And I'm not going to do a call back and forth with you because we don't do that on Can We Talk, but I am going to call Colleen back in to talk about this notion of shame, that we don't want people to know that we're lonely, that we don't even want to admit that we're lonely. And I think that's a big issue. I think this caller brought up a really important one, don't you?
Absolutely. It's reminding me of something. And before I say what that memory is, this is so profound, because if you really think about it, to say we're lonely and admit it, even to ourselves, never mind someone else, culturally, what we've done is put it like an indictment as to our worth, to be wanted to be with. Are we worthy enough to want people with us? It's as if it's sort of the Facebook. How many friends do we have? How many clicks did we get? How many, whatever. It's just so built in as a judgment that it would be so normal that people end up feeling, we all feel shame to say that. I think what that caller said is true for all of us. And I bet you'd never find someone who really said it very often to anybody, if they said it at all, because it really is that cultural take around it. But what I think it also connects with is, I once heard, and I don't know who the philosopher was that said it, but that we are prisoners in our own skin. It's a fact. And what that meant was, there is no way another person on this planet can truly know all of you. We are already alone in the sense that no one's ever going to know everything about us, or fully get us, or fully understand us in a perfected way. And I think that's an existential issue. Have you heard that word? It's like the kind of state of being human. We have to understand that's part of this. And I think that's why, to ever say to someone, I'm lonely, two things happen. There's like what's wrong with you is their response in their mind. And the second is, well, what do you want me to do about it? Because people don't know how to meet that loneliness in someone. So I think that's true.
Though, because the person who said, what do you want me to do about it, is probably lonely too.
Exactly.
I think it's not, quoting a good friend of mine who's a guru, here's the good news on this. As I grow older, and I think this may be true of all of us, but let me tell you what's happening with me, because I'm my best example. You lose your filters as you grow older, and you just start saying stuff. I used to get really upset with my mother as she grew older, because she would always stop people on the street down in Little Rock and say, did I teach you? Are you? And I don't know if her mind was going or she really thought she would talk people. But now, I was with a friend this weekend. I was with Deborah, and we got on the elevator, and this handsome young man got on the elevator, and he was in a uniform. And I said, boy, you sure do look good. And he was like, I'm sure he was shocked. These two old ladies, were they drunk? What was wrong with them? But I suddenly, not suddenly, over growing older, I reach out more than I have ever before without fear. You know what? What's the worst that can happen?
Right.
I think that's one thing you can do. And you may be rejected, and somebody may think you're crazy. But I think it's worth it to just reach out, to speak, even just to say hello, kind of breaks through that loneliness.
One of my dearest friends, who's long gone past, I thought she had this so right. She said, it's hilarious the way we're created. We're created to really, connect and do all these wonderful things. But the more you connect, the more you love, the more you're going to get hurt. Are we crazy? We're psychotic if we're doing this, right? It's brave to be human and to be out there and to connect. And you just reminded me of another thing we have to say. As we get older, then we start losing people. From doesn't mean just from something traumatic, but just from dying. Our parents go, our friends go. And if you live long enough, you might damn well be alone from everyone you knew. We have to admit that's part of this. Yeah. And we don't have a culture that helps us navigate that.
No. But one way to navigate it is to knowing that is inevitable, is to reach out to the people that you know and love. Yeah. And whether you say I'm lonely or don't say I'm lonely, reach out, connect. And to not Colleen, this has been such a special
Oh, it's
connection
been wonderful.
with you to talk about this. So thank you so much for bringing your expertise.
Oh,
And
it's an
most
honor.
importantly, thank you
It's
for
an honor.
bringing your
Thanks for asking.
No, thank you for bringing your heart. We thank our 3 callers from our community who will remain anonymous only because that's the way we like to do Can We Talk. And we certainly hope that you will join us. We'll be here again next Tuesday. Colleen's going to come back sometime soon and join me. We'll have another topic. But this is a community. This is our online community that we can kind of work through these things. So we hope we've given you a few tips on how you can break through loneliness, because we're here, and we should be here for each other. So now we've got somebody who just got on. What was that? Sometimes shame, something we experience and or observed others do when we were growing up. So she's talking about learned shame.
Learned shame.
Yeah.
That's
So we know
excellent point.
that's a really good point. So thank you, Meadow, for adding that point. But thank you all for joining us. We'll be back next week. Okay, now people are here. Maybe what I'm trying to say is, okay, we're going to stay on for a few seconds. Kathy,
Yes,
we
absolutely.
want to go for people with clutter, sometimes to the level of hoarding. And I see people from community reduce shame. It is so powerful. That's interesting.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
hoarding is one of the, oh, wow, that's
Yeah,
shame.
hoarding has gone up so much. Well, I don't think it's so much that it has both gone up and now we know and understand it more. It is now an actual diagnosis in the statistical manual when you're working with clients. And I have seen this too. The clutter is to put it around you sometimes for some people in the place of other people or in the place of connection.
Wow.
Not always. Sometimes it's another way to do it. Yep. And when people are helped to let go of that and to be free, you can really see that shame reduced. It is so powerful.
That
so
is
nice.
powerful. So shame, loneliness, hoarding are all connected. Wow, there's a lot that we've learned here tonight. A lot that we learned. Kathy, thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you all. Now I'm going to get off, Micah, whether you put a new message in there or not, because you told me it was time to get off. Thank you all for joining us.
Bye-bye.
This next week. Bye-bye from the heart. God bless you all.